Okay, in class we were talking about the aftermath of the XYZ affair during John Adams' administration. And I told you guys that the denial of access to the French foreign minister Talleyrand had led to this undeclared naval war between the United States and France, sometimes called the Quasi-War, sometimes just called the Undeclared Naval War. And so our ships were being seized and attacked on the open seas. Now, the British were still doing this, but the French had really picked up the pace. And of course, it has the result of the XYZ affair is this real threat on the all right, in class, we left off talking about the aftermath of the XYZ affair. Marshall, Pinckney, and Elbridge Gerry have been sent to France to meet with Talleyrand. They have been refused access by three French delegates named, who were never really named in Marshall's report to Congress, but were instead called X, Y, and Z. And the result of the XYZ affair led us closer and closer to war with France. The Federalists in Congress pushed Adams to declare war on France. And essentially, from about 1798 until about 1800, you have an undeclared naval war between the United States and France, sometimes called the Quasi-War, sometimes called the Undeclared Naval War. But in essence, the French were very unhappy with us for what we had done in signing treaties with England and with Spain without really their approval. So the French have a reason to gripe at us. We, of course, have a reason to gripe at them because of the way Marshall and Pinckney and Gerry were treated. And so the result is that we end up moving towards a really an American sort of move towards war. The XYZ affair led to the ending of the French alliance, the creation of a formal naval department, the appropriation of money for the army and to build warships. We start attacking French shipping just like they were attacking ours. And so we end up really in a situation where war could be declared between the United States and France, it seems, at any moment, much to the chagrin of our Vice President, Thomas Jefferson, who is, of course, if you remember, pro-French in his foreign policy outlook. The Federalists see a real opportunity to attack Jefferson and his political party. And so the hostility between the United States and France leads to the passage out of Congress and the signing by Adams of a series of laws that we lump together and call the Alien and Sedition Acts. Okay, the Alien and Sedition Acts were really first you have to understand that they are an attack on Jefferson's party. The Federalists believe that many of the people coming to America, especially coming to America from war-torn France, would eventually gain citizenship and would immediately start voting for Jefferson and his political party. The Federalists sort of see themselves as a party that may be on borrowed time. And so they are going to do everything in their power here to try to attack Jefferson's political party. The Alien Acts, okay, as you see them here, okay, consisted of several different acts, all essentially dealing with immigration. Okay, the Alien Acts, and when you lump them all together, included a Naturalization Act, which increased the eligibility for citizenship from 5 years to 14 years. So in other words, you had to have lived in this country for 14 years before you could even apply for citizenship. That's a huge increase. I mean, it's almost triple the time. And that was designed to kick the can down the road for those people that come to America and apply for citizenship, especially from war-torn France. The Alien Enemies Act gave the president the power to arrest or expel enemies in times of declared war. And the Alien Act said the president can expel all aliens deemed dangerous to the peace and safety of the United States. So it wasn't just that it increased the naturalization time, but it also gave the president the authority to expel, people from the country if they were deemed to be dangerous. Okay. By far, really, though, the most dangerous of the Alien and Sedition Acts that were passed are the Sedition Acts. Okay. Essentially, the Sedition Act made it a crime to impede the operation of any law. It made it illegal to publish or speak any false, scandalous, or malicious criticism of high government officials. And what that led to, of course, is a situation where there is an act passed out of Congress and signed by Adams that appears to violate the Bill of Rights. In the Bill of Rights, you are guaranteed, according to the First Amendment, the right to free speech, the right to peaceably assemble, the right to avoid having religion forced on you or forcing religion on anyone else. But the freedom of the press and your ability to criticize government officials is held in that First Amendment. And the Sedition Act seems, as you guys can probably tell here, it seems to go against the First Amendment. The question becomes, okay, the Sedition Act, when we all look at it here, the Sedition Act clearly appears to violate the Constitution. So what do you do about it? And really, the Constitution doesn't really have a way of policing itself yet. So what do you do if Congress and the president both agree to pass a law that seems to violate the Constitution? Ordinarily, you would think that the court system would solve this, okay? But courts sometimes take a lot of time. And this seemed to be, at least to some of our founders, seemed to be a pretty clear and present danger. And they are going to speak out against the Sedition Act in a very strange way, okay? Thomas Jefferson, the sitting vice president, and James Madison will together author a series. Well, it's not really a series. They will author a resolution. All right, one that will be taken up by the Virginia House of Burgesses, the Virginia Assembly, one that will be taken up by Kentucky's. And those two states are going to really take these resolutions that had been authored by Jefferson and Madison and pass them through their own state legislatures. Okay, Jefferson writes the one for Kentucky, Madison writes the one for Virginia. And so Madison and Jefferson both believe that the Alien and Sedition Acts violated the First Amendment. They were an invasion of states' rights. And so they author a response that is adapted or adopted by Virginia and Kentucky, and they become known as the Virginia and Kentucky Resolves or the Virginia and Kentucky Resolutions. Okay, when you deal into or you kind of get into them, okay, what both Virginia and Kentucky say in these resolutions that they pass out of their own state government is that the Constitution is a compact, an agreement, in other words, between sovereign states. Each state had an equal right to judge for itself when the Constitution had been violated. A state, therefore, can declare a law of Congress unconstitutional. Okay, that's a bit of a stretch. Okay, and nowhere really in the document does it say that. So Madison and Jefferson are essentially claiming this right for the states and argue that it should be the states that can have a determination about whether or not they believe that an act passed by Congress is unconstitutional. Virginia adopts Madison's resolution. Jefferson's is adapted or adopted by Kentucky. And so what this really means has a short-term effect and a long-term effect, okay? In the short term, it's really not all that important, okay? Virginia and Kentucky are just two states, and in the long run, it matters very little, okay? Neither side and neither state really does anything substantial with it. They pass it out, but nothing else really is done. You don't see Virginia threaten the government. You don't see Kentucky threaten the government. Okay, nothing really happens. Now, long run, it's much more important. It is a precedent for states' rights. It's a precedent for sectionalism. It is a precedent for the states taking more authority away from the federal government. It's a way that the states believe that they can retain some of their power over the central government by essentially saying that the central government is wrong, and we, the states, believe that they're whatever it is, whether it's a sedition act, whether it's some other act that comes along down the road, is unconstitutional. We haven't gotten to the point where the court is going to claim this authority. It's coming, but we haven't gotten there yet. So this is really our first attempt to try to define what we would do if Congress and the president pass a law that would violate the Constitution. In the meantime, okay, while all this is going on, France decides that they would rather negotiate with the United States than to continue this undeclared war. France realizes that it's already struggling. It doesn't have any allies. It doesn't really want to add another enemy. And so France sends word to Adams that if he would send back the commissioners or send back commissioners, he would meet with them and would accept new negotiations without any bribes, having to exchange hands. Now, Adams's party, the Federalist Party, wants Adams to declare war. They are still pushing Adams to declare war on France. Okay. They were even pushing Adams to consider going to war with Spain over border issues between the United States and Florida. So a lot of the members of Congress who become very hawkish as they start to push war, they argue, look, Spain's weak. Spain controls Florida and New Orleans. We can beat up on Spain. Okay. So if you're not going to go to war with France, let's go to war with Spain. Okay. Adams is going to resist all of that. Strangely, okay, he is going to buck his own party. And instead of declaring war on France or instead of declaring war on Spain, he decides to send negotiators back to France, and it will result in treaties. Okay, ministers are sent from France or to France and to Spain to negotiate new treaties, and it infuriates the hawkish members of Adams's own party. Some are so unhappy and so upset at what Adams has done, they just simply won't support Adams in the next election. So France decides to, in some ways, take the high road and say, look, we're done. We need to come back together, and we need to work with you. Okay. Adams says, okay. And so I will go and work with you. And what it results in is no war for right now. But I want you to kind of understand that Adams really, as president, is done. He's become a man without a party. And so as a result, you're going to see him be defeated in the next election. Adams really has no shot. Okay. And instead, we all know that Jefferson is going to be elected president in 1800. Okay. This is a new opportunity for Jefferson and his political party. Okay. Some historians are going to call this the Revolution of 1800 because, in the first time in our nation's history, we're going to have a president from a different political party, a different political persuasion, be elected president. And there's going to have to be a peaceful transfer of power. There is nobody more qualified to become our next president than Thomas Jefferson. Okay, born in Virginia, graduate of William and Mary, practicing lawyer, member of Virginia's House of Burgesses, father of the Declaration of Independence, Secretary of State under President Washington, Vice President under Adams, diplomat to France. All right, Jefferson's intellect and Jefferson's record of service is impeccable. Nobody is better prepared, really, to become president than Jefferson is. But Jefferson has been hypercritical of many of the things the government has done up to this point. He's been critical of the Federalists. He was never a fan of strengthening the central government. He has really had difficulties with Hamilton and the Federalists. So Jefferson is and has been an outspoken critic of the direction of our government so far. But I also want you to understand is that once he becomes president, he becomes a man of contradictions. Okay, we've always view him as anti-British and pro-French in his foreign policy. But during his presidency, we're going to find out that he almost allies the nation with England and goes to war with France to force Napoleon out of New Orleans. Almost exactly the opposite of what he claims to be. He talks about how he is not a fan of slavery. He, though, owns slaves and has had relationships with those slaves, okay, including Sally Hemings, who produces children from Jefferson. So even though he claims to be against slavery, he owns 200 slaves. I told you guys that he interpreted the Constitution very strictly, claiming that Hamilton was wrong in trying to bring us a Bank of the United States. He had hammered Hamilton about the lack of a clause anywhere in the Constitution that created a Bank of the United States. So he is not a fan of anything that doesn't really show up in the Constitution. Okay, but he will, when given the opportunity, he will choose to interpret the Constitution loosely when he gets the opportunity to purchase the Louisiana Territory. Nowhere in the Constitution does it give the president the right to negotiate the sale of land between one country and the other. So Jefferson is going to twist his powers a little bit, and instead of purchasing the Louisiana Purchase straightforward, just a cash for land exchange, he instead has to deal with it using a treaty. And that is what will get us the Louisiana Purchase. So Jefferson is smart enough and Jefferson is intelligent enough to realize that there's a difference between ideas and what you have to put into practice in the real world. His presidency is going to really challenge many of the ideas that he held dear, because realizing that you have to put those into practice in the real world is going to be really tough on him. By 1800, the Federalist Party was really struggling, okay? And the election of 1800 is going to sweep aside really the Federalists for a while. But the Democratic Republicans also have their own problems. Okay, when in 1800 they decide to do what the Federalists had actually done prior, they will send two men to run for the presidency, Thomas Jefferson and a lawyer from New York named Aaron Burr. Jefferson and Burr kind of formed the team. And of course, according to the Constitution now, you have to understand that one should get the most electoral votes, okay? And the one that finishes second will become the vice president to the one that got the most electoral votes, okay? So when the election was held in the 1800 and the electoral votes were counted, we're going to find an issue, as you guys are going to see, okay? Jefferson and Burr ran against the sitting, President John Adams and Pinckney again, okay? And so the Federalists offer the sitting president and Pinckney as their candidates. Jefferson and Burr get about 53% of the popular vote. It's a pretty close election, really, when you kind of get down to it. Adams and Pinckney got about 47% of the vote. But and you can see kind of how the vote broke down. All of these purple states voted for Jefferson. Some split in North Carolina and Pennsylvania, and parts of Delaware, or of Maryland. Okay, and you can see the Federalist stronghold of New England went for Adams and Pinckney. But, okay, we have a problem. It's not just that Jefferson and Burr win, because they do. Okay, Jefferson and Burr win. But this issue right up here, okay, is a big problem. Because when the electoral vote is counted, Jefferson and Burr tie. They both get 73 electoral votes. And according to the Constitution, okay, according to the Constitution, that means that the House of Representatives is going to have to choose the President of the United States. Okay? When Jefferson and Burr received an equal number of votes in the Electoral College, automatically the election gets thrown into the House of Representatives, who are required to choose a president. And by the way, the Federalists dominate the House of Representatives, which means, of course, that you have a rival political party essentially choosing the president. Okay, so this is the second election in a row, 1796 election and now the 1800 election, that we have had serious issues with the election. Okay. All right. So this gets thrown into the House of Representatives, dominated by the Federalists. Remember that the leader of the Federalist Party is Hamilton. Okay. And Hamilton disagreed on virtually everything that Jefferson stood for. Okay. But Hamilton also was not a big fan of Aaron Burr, considered him to be a most unfit and dangerous man. So Hamilton is in a position essentially to choose, to get his party in the House of Representatives to choose between someone that he has fought tooth and nail against really for years, dating all the way back to Washington's administration, or someone that he personally does not like in Aaron Burr. The House of Representatives deadlocks, okay? And by deadlock, I mean they returned a tied ballot, okay, 35 times. And as the ballots continue to come back and continue to tie, it creates a constitutional crisis. There's a date, essentially, that you have to have a president selected by. Okay, you have this window of opportunity between the election in November and inauguration day. Now, today we inaugurate presidents in January. Then they inaugurated presidents in March and April. So, depending on the calendar, but mostly in March, I think. The so you had a little bit more time, but essentially the House of Representatives is operating on a deadline, and they have to choose a president by inauguration day. And as these ballots keep dragging on and dragging on, Virginia was already ready to call out its militia and march it into Washington, D.C., and force these guys to do their job. Hamilton finally puts enough pressure on some of the delegates from the Federalist Party to cast votes to where Jefferson would win. And so after 35 ballots, Jefferson wins and becomes the president of the United States. So when the House of Representatives selects Jefferson as the new president, Aaron Burr becomes the new vice president. And I'm sure those guys really liked each other after this disaster of an election. Remember, I told you guys that this is considered to be the Revolution of 1800. Okay, when Adams loses, okay, and but willingly will turn over power to Jefferson on inauguration day. Okay, we call it revolutionary because the nowhere else did this. Okay, nowhere else managed to do this without significant bloodshed. This peaceful transfer of power sort of showed how grown up we had become in our government. So when Jefferson becomes president, you have a president from a rival political organization that becomes president without the shedding of blood, and it's one of our great achievements. To eliminate future problems, okay, to eliminate some of these future problems from happening, okay, the 12th Amendment is put into place. And what the 12th Amendment does is it requires electors to specify which person they want for president and vice president on separate ballots, essentially, so there was never be a tie between two people of the same party. Okay, so the 12th Amendment essentially means that you as a party have to designate which person you want for president and which person you want for vice president. And it prevents what happened in the election of 1800 from happening again. Now, Jefferson has won. The election of 1800 has taken place. All this voting shenanigans going on. And in the last days of Adams' administration, really as we get towards inauguration day, Congress has passed, because Congress comes back into session in January, Congress passes a new Judiciary Act, okay? This Judiciary Act created some new federal courts and new federal judgeships. Adams will fill those judgeships, even though he has been defeated in the election. In this period between the time that he loses the election and Jefferson is inaugurated, is sometimes called the lame duck period. Okay, you're still president, but you're not the president-elect. During that time period, these new offices or these new judgeships are created, and Adams decides to fill them, which means that during these few months between the time the election is held and the time that he gives up power to Jefferson, he fills these judgeships with Federalist judges. Sometimes they're called Adams's midnight judges, because the story is that he stayed up until midnight of inauguration day making these appointments. So after the inauguration, when Jefferson walks into the office to begin work, he sees these stacks of papers that are judgeships that had been made by Adams. Jefferson is not really happy about that, and is going to try to find a way to resist this by not giving out some of these judgeships, and it leads to a hugely important, really, Supreme Court case. But I told you guys that Jefferson, when he comes into office, is also going to be a new guy. Okay, he is Jefferson is it's just a new guy. Okay, he walked. He everywhere he went, really, or rode his horse. He did not dress very formally. He did not host really formal dining parties. Okay. Rather than going to Congress and speaking himself, he oftentimes sent them messages to be read. He does not dismiss many Federalist appointments, which is constant with what he had said in his inauguration, that we are not Federalists, we are not Democrats, Republicans, we're not Jeffersonians, we are Americans. Jefferson is very charismatic, very powerful, okay, as a person, and sometimes he's going to use that charisma and that power to influence politicians to do things the way he wants to. Another thing that we sort of attribute to Jefferson's election is this idea of Jeffersonian democracy. What is Jeffersonian democracy? Jeffersonian democracy is democracy, or really a form of government that bleeds down to the common man. Jefferson believed that education is so important because it prepares all of us for participation in government. Jefferson believed that education is the key. It's the way you moved up in society. So Jefferson has a lot of faith in the common everyday American. Okay. He believes firmly that the educated should rule. He is a firm believer in the common man, in the farmer, in the person in rural America. And he believes they can govern and should govern. So he keeps most of the Federalist programs, including the treaties that had been signed by Adams and Washington, because they were working, okay, and it kept us out of war. He continued to follow Washington's really policy of neutrality. The bank is, he doesn't attack the bank. He doesn't attack tariffs. The Federalists had every opportunity to really get wiped out here. When you put a new president into office, Jefferson could have gotten rid of everything. The bank, all of these Federalist appointments. He could have done a real house cleaning, but he doesn't. Okay, he keeps the treaties, he keeps the bank, he keeps Federalists really in their jobs that are doing their jobs. Okay, and look, Jefferson realizes that these Federalists had just as much trouble as he is going to have governing. It's real easy to say what you're doing when you're not held responsible for it. And so the Federalists are going to, some Federalist programs at least, and some Federalists themselves are actually going to survive, even though we know that Jefferson is pretty bitterly anti-Federalist, and of course pretty bitterly anti-strong government, anti-bank, and things like that. But he keeps the bank going because it's what's getting the country out of debt. It's working. He really wants to show Americans that this two-party system can work, and that if you lose, it's not a disaster, okay, that you could come back. Now, there are a few things that Jefferson does get rid of, and you could probably guess what they are: the Alien and Sedition Acts, okay? He will wipe those out, okay? The Alien and Sedition Acts will be done away with, Anybody that had been pardoned, or anybody that had been convicted, excuse me, under the Sedition Act was pardoned by the president, which is one of his powers. Okay. And the residency requirement is moved back to 5 years. Okay. And so that is one of the things that does happen. All right. We're going to take a break here. Okay. We're going to stop here. And when we get back into class next week, we are going to start taking a look at Jefferson's policies, what he's doing, what he does about all of those Adams's midnight appointment things. Okay, so we're going to have to take a look at what really Jefferson is up to while he is president. All right,